bitch. I'm just kidding, of course. My name is Joe Betting, and I'm a state senator from the Caledonia Orange District.
God bless you.
You guys didn't send me a campaign donation. We are here today to talk about a winning moratorium, and I'm using the introduction as a little bit of levity for a good reason. Those of us who have been talking about a moratorium on industrial wind have been taking a lot of flack over especially the past 6 days, and quite frankly I'm not sure whether to laugh or to be sad at some of the comments that I've been hearing, but I thought I'd share a couple of those comments with you. I've heard that this moratorium would be a jobs killer and that it would ruin Vermont's chances of being a leader in renewable energy efforts. I have heard that the moratorium is being led by a fringe element, perhaps Republicans. But if perchance you happen to be in support of this moratorium, I would like to welcome you to the vast right-wing conspiracy. Most disturbingly, I have heard that this effort is, according to a developer, stupid. I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we are standing in an historical building, that we are all Vermonters, and if I may take some liberty of using what I think Howard Coffin would say if he was standing right here, instead of standing right there. Let me point out that our mountaintop ridge lines have been cherished from the get-go in this state, and it all started with a guy whose statue is now on the portico of this building. It was Ethan Allen who once said, when threatened with his personal liberty loss, that the gods of the valleys are not the gods of the hills, and that rather than surrender his cherished way of life to then New York royal authorities, he would just as soon retire into the desolate caverns of the Green Mountains to wage war with mankind at large. I grew up in this Vermont environment, understanding that we had a cherished history with our mountains. I am familiar with what happened in Calvin Coolidge's day, when in his generation, a federal government decided to send Vermont some money if we would open up a Green Mountain Skyway. And Vermonters rose up and said, absolutely not. I am familiar with George Aiken, who, whether you like nuclear power or not, used nuclear power as an excuse to not have to continually pollute our environment. We can talk about whether that was a wise choice or not. I am familiar with Dean Davis, who, when he developed Act 250, had in mind the rampant development that was taking place on the hillsides around him for ski area purposes. I am mindful of Richard Snelling, who stood in this very room, and I was standing in the back of the room in the 1970s, listening as he addressed a group of foreign diplomats from the UN. When he made comment about the fact that Vermont used to have only 20% of its landmass covered by forest, but that in his lifetime it had been reversed so that we now had 80% of landmass forested. And I am mindful of Jim Jeffords, Bob Stafford, and Patrick Leahy, who introduced to this generation of Vermonters something that we all got pretty rankled about, called acid rain. The threat of some kind of pollution coming across the skies to defoliate what we have in our mountaintop ridgelines. So with those historical thoughts in mind, let's see what it is that the pro-wind forces are asking us to ignore. I'm going to ask Senator Bobby Starr here to play Vanna White for a minute.
I don't know for sure. Pretty bad.
Pretty obscene.
This is our PowerPoint presentation. We're low tech here. What you're looking at is one of the 21 pads that now sit atop the Lowell Mountain Ridge line. If you have not had the opportunity to actually climb up that hill, as I have done, or fly over that hill, as I have done, and this is as close as I can possibly get you to think about the fact that we are destroying all of that historical perspective that I just talked about. And in exchange for what? Bobby, if you can turn to page 2 there.
Hit the clicker.
I would hit the clicker, but I'm afraid of what Bobby might do as a result. That's the Lowell Ridge line. You remember that Green Mountain Skyway that Vermonters rode up and said, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen in our state. Well, great. We, in our generation, have turned that on its head, and now look at what we have. That's the Lowell Ridge line. And I believe that's one of Steve Wright's pictures.
It might be. That first one.
Lowell is up and operating, and so is Sheffield, and so is Searsburg, and a couple of other of these projects that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the data that is being produced by those projects, we haven't taken a whole lot of time yet to study. Yep.
I want to see if I could turn it around.
Okay. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is our Public Service Board has gone from its original mission of trying to determine whether or not a public good can be sustained when electric power is available, it itself can be sustained, and it is inexpensive. That was the original intent of the Public Service Board. That mission has now morphed into industrial wind is renewable, and therefore it is good. We must build it now. We must build as much of it as possible. And we totally ignore this kind of environmental destruction and the social upheaval that comes along with it. Industrial wind, ladies and gentlemen, is but one tool in a toolbox full of renewable energy tools that we are talking about when trying to address climate change. This moratorium effort is not intended to stop our progress towards affecting climate change. To the contrary, all that we are doing is asking that in the case of this one particular tool, that effort be done right. This is not right.
Here, here, here.
This state have been impacted by what's going on with these kinds of projects. We have two of them here today, one a Democrat, one a Republican. I'm not talking about Senator Hartwell and myself, but I'd like to just say a couple of words, and then I'll come back again and talk with you a little bit. Vicki, John, who would like to start?
Thank you, Joe. I'm Senator-elect John Rogers from Glover, and though I don't see either of the projects from my house, I don't have to go very far before I can see both of them. And one of the things that's not being discussed is what it does to the community and how it tears the community apart. How, if you're a wind proponent, I'd like for you to think for a minute if you would like to live in the shadow of one of these industrial wind developments. Heard complaints from constituents who can't sleep at night, their kids can't sleep. They feel the vibrations, they hear the noise, their property values have declined, all the equity that's taken them years to build in their home and their property has disappeared. Those are just a few of the effects. And so ask yourself if you would want that to happen to your home, your fortress of solitude. And many of us live in that community because we want the solitude, and these industrial wind sites have destroyed that.
Hello everyone, I'm Representative Vicki Strong. I represent 7 towns in the Northeast Kingdom. I'm from Albany. I want to thank all of my constituents who are here from Albany and Craftsbury, Glover, Orleans, Barton, Wheelock, Sheffield, Greensboro. I'm not sure who I've missed, but those are the towns I represent. I'm privileged to be here on your behalf and to represent what is right and true and what we need to continue to fight for in our state, for energy that is reliable and is renewable, but done so in an appropriate way. I believe wind towers are not appropriate for the state of Vermont, and they're not sustainable nor economical. So let's be on the side of what's right and what's true and continue the fight for the moratorium on wind. Thank you all.
I said earlier that wind, industrial wind especially, is but one tool in a large toolbox full of renewable energy tools. And we need to take a look and step back, hit the reset button, if you will, and start redefining the conversation about why it is a moratorium is critically important at this time. We've gotten ahead of ourselves. We haven't asked simple questions. Let me suggest for just a moment that the recent appointment by the governor of a siting commission is by itself prima facie evidence of what I'm talking about. We are starting to do the investigation of what we are doing to ourselves after we have already begun doing it. Questions that we hope to incorporate in a wind moratorium bill. Shouldn't we take the Siting Commission's recommendations before we start to do this kind of destruction on our ridge lines? Shouldn't we understand the environmental impact of clear cutting in the case of Lowell Mountain? 135 acres of mountain forest, thus removing some of our best carbon vacuum cleaners? Shouldn't we understand what it means when our headwaters are impacted by long roads and huge concrete pads? Shouldn't we understand the ramifications of granting permits to take an endangered species? How dare anyone call themselves an environmentalist if they accept taking an endangered species? That's wrong, and it's not correct. How we can stand idly by while umbrella species, and for those of you that don't know what that means, it means at the top of the food chain, are killed on a daily basis by these monstrosities. What's happening with the disruption of our wildlife habitat when we use this particular tool? Shouldn't we calculate the energy that's lost across great distances of transmission lines? Clicker number 3. Or the disruption of our wildlife corridors when you clear cut a linear path through miles and miles of pristine forest lands. What you're looking at right now is the transmission line that's running from the Sheffield wind site to Lyndonville. Shouldn't we be estimating the cost of decommissioning not just the towers themselves that have about a 20 to 25 year life expectancy, but also the concrete monuments for base pads that people will be looking at 1,000 years from now? Oh, hold that back up. The Romans had their Colosseum. The Greeks their Parthenon. Congratulations, this generation of Vermonters has just left this on a mountainside for the next 1,000 years. You don't grow back trees through that kind of concrete pad.
That's right.
You don't rebuild mountaintops that have been blown away. That's not Vermont.
Yeah.